Ellen Coquin. I'm going to open up the staff hearing officer meeting for July 26, 2023. We will start with preliminary matters, any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of X agenda items. I do not have any. That's okay. Forgot about that. Next, I will move into announcements. And appeals. I do not have any appeals currently, and I do have two announcements today. One is an announcement for 1625 Santa Rosa Avenue. This is an announcement of the staff hearing officer decision on a coastal development permit for a project at 1625 Santa Rosa Avenue. The project consists of a proposal to construct a new 569 square foot second story attached accessory dwelling unit on a 7,033 square foot lot. The subject parcel is developed with a 2,870 square foot two-story single unit residence with an attached two-car garage, which is proposed to remain. The discretionary applications under the jurisdiction of the staff hearing officer for this project are a coastal development permit to allow the proposed development in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the city's coastal zone, and secondly, to determine that the project is categorically exempt from further environmental review pursuant to California Environmental Quality Act guidelines, section 15303, new construction or conversion of small structures. So anytime there's a development that's proposed that involves an accessory dwelling unit to an existing single-family residence, this application is reviewed by the staff hearing officer, but there's no public hearing. Anyone can submit written correspondence, and just want to confirm that I did not receive any written correspondence for this project. And I have read the staff report and have gone out on site to see the context, and I am approving this coastal development permit and can also determine that it is categorically exempt as defined in the staff report, as written in the staff report, and my approval is subject to the conditions that are also included in the staff report. Again, this is a final action, a final decision by the city. Secondly, we have an announcement for 2537 Murrell Road. Similarly, this project consists of a proposal to convert a 407 square foot attached two-car garage to an accessory dwelling unit with a 200 square foot walled patio located in the front yard on an 8,887 square foot lot. The project includes two uncovered replacement parking spaces in the existing driveway and new fencing and gates 6 feet in height. The subject parcel is developed with a 967 square foot single-story single unit residence, which would remain. The discretionary applications under the jurisdiction of the staff hearing officer required for this project are a coastal development permit to allow the proposed development in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the city's coastal zone, and then secondly, to determine that the project is categorically exempt from further environmental review pursuant to California Environmental Quality Act guidelines, section 15303, new construction or conversion of small structures. Again, similarly, there's no public hearing for this particular item, but I can receive written correspondence, which I can confirm I did not receive any written correspondence for this project. I've read the staff report. I agree with staff's conclusions. I did a site visit, and I can approve the coastal development permit as well as determine that this project is categorically exempt from further environmental review. And my decision is subject to the conditions that are included in the staff report. Again, this is a final action of the city. And then moving on to preliminary matters, open up to general public comment. So if there's anyone in the audience or via Zoom who wishes to speak on items not on today's agenda, while we're waiting, I can confirm that I received written correspondence from Bob and Cindy Perlis that was distributed prior to the hearing. Ms. Gu, do we have anybody who wishes to speak on general public comment?
Zoom, I do not have anyone with a raised hand on comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. And then anyone in the audience? I don't see anyone in the audience, so I'm going to go ahead and close general public comment, and we will move on to our first agenda item, which is 647 Sea Ranch Drive. This is a 2.5 acre site. It's currently developed with a 2-story single unit residence with an attached 2-car garage. The project consists of a proposal to construct a new detached 2-story accessory structure comprised of a 371 square foot single car garage and a 341 square foot workshop on the ground floor with a 621 square foot accessory dwelling unit above, including a 47 square foot balcony and solar panels. Associated improvements include new exterior stairs and retaining walls, a patio, removal of 2 non-specimen citrus trees. The project also includes demolition of 2 storage sheds and construction of a new 298 square foot single car garage. And the discretionary applications under the jurisdiction of the staff hearing officer for this project are a floor area modification to allow for a total of 1,286 square feet of garage floor area, and a coastal development permit to allow the proposed development in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the city's coastal zone. And then lastly, determination that the project is categorically exempt from further environmental review pursuant to CEQA section 15303. And we have Ms. Plummer here as the assigned case planner. Whenever you're ready, and Ms. Gu, if you wouldn't mind switching over to the other laptop. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kokinda. Again, I'm Pilar Plummer, Associate Planner with the City of Santa Barbara Planning and Zoning Division, and I'll be giving the staff presentation for this project. I'll just start off with some photos just so we have context for the site, but the project that's before you today is located at 647 Sea Ranch Drive, and the overall proposal involves a new accessory structure comprised of a single car garage, a workshop, and an accessory dwelling unit above, as well as an additional single car garage. And just so you have some context of the location, the new accessory structure is proposed here, and there's some existing sheds here which are going to be demolished and replaced with a new single car garage. So the discretionary applications, as you noted, that are before you today are a coastal development permit. Those are required for new accessory dwelling units in the coastal zone. This project site's located in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the coastal zone, as well as a floor area modification to allow for a total of 1,286 square feet of garage floor area. The maximum allowed for this zone is 750 square feet. The site is already currently developed with a single family residence as well as an attached 2-car garage, approximately 617 square feet. So they are asking for the additional garage floor area to accommodate a single car garage that will be used for the accessory dwelling unit, as well as additional garage that will serve the residents. And I'm going to switch to some additional photos. So these are just photos that give the overall context of the site. Below you can see the residence here with the existing garage. The majority of the house is single story, and then there's an area above the garage. That's a 2-story component. And you can sort of see by just the topography of the site. This is a flag-shaped lot and almost a valley, so it's really well hidden if you walked out onto the site. And then going to the site plan. So I noted in the staff report that, and as you noted for the preliminary matters for ADUs, those do not generally have a public hearing, but I will reference it today just in context over the overall request for the floor area modification. So as I mentioned, the allowance for garage floor area in this zone is 750 square feet, and they're asking for 1,286 square feet. The purpose of this request is to add a garage for the ADU. There's no requirement to have covered parking for the accessory dwelling unit. They are required to, however, provide a parking space, whether it's covered or uncovered, just due to the location. It's in an area that is not within a half mile of public transit, so that's just a requirement for the ADU, and they've opted to provide a parking space that will serve the ADU as just a benefit to that unit. And looking at the lower floor plan, this is the garage that they're proposing, as well as the accessory space that's essentially a workshop with the ADU above. Part of the reason as well for the request to have a garage for the ADU is to provide structural support for the ADU above, so for the overall building. Additionally, the owners have a number of cars. They have their 2-car garage now. With the proposal, they'll have a total of 4 covered parking spaces on site. Again, 1 for the ADU and then 3 for the residents. So it's essentially a benefit to the property just to have that additional garage floor area. I do want to note that while the ADU doesn't require the covered parking space, even if they were to exempt that from the project, not propose it, they would still need the floor area modification if they did want to do the additional single-car garage, because their maximum would be at 915 square feet, so it would still exceed the amount allowed for the zone. This is a low-density residential zoning district, which allows for single-family as well as other accessory structures, including accessory dwelling units. And in staff's review of the project, there are no zoning consistency issues with the additionally requested garage floor area. As you can see by the site, it's a flag lot. It's quite large. It's over 2.5 acres, just slightly. And again, from the street, no improvements are really visible. There's a very long driveway. And just based on the site topography, everything is very much screened. So in staff's review, there was no or negligible concerns relative to noise or privacy issues for adjoining neighbors. The project was reviewed overall by the Single Family Design Board, and they had no comments negatively about the design of the project. They did want the accessory structure to have a similar pitch as the existing residence and for colors to match, but in terms of the aesthetic appropriateness of the requested floor area modification, they didn't have any issues with it. Per their comments, it was effectively invisible on the site, and they did not have concerns relative to that. So staff is recommending approval of the floor area modification based on that, and I'm joined by the applicant, Ms. Hughes, if she wants to present any additional information. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Plummer. And if you could just please say your name for the record. And if you wish to qualify any other points about this particular request.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kokinda and Pilar. My name is Liz Hughes, representing Tom Oxner Architect. So this project, as Pilar mentioned, is an accessory structure, an ADU above a proposed garage and workshop, as well as a detached garage. This, as you can see from the site plan, is located far from the street, so street parking is not really an option for the residents of this property, which is why we're proposing 2 additional garage spaces. They currently have they're parking outside of the garage right now, but they'd like to have the additional spaces, especially for the new residential unit that's being proposed. We also spoke to the fire department about access to the site, and they approved the existing driveway configuration. Part of the reason for the location of that ADU is that it's buried into the hillside, and putting the garage below is able to kind of lift it up and provide natural light for the occupants of that unit, as well as kind of remove some of that street parking so that the fire department has better access, when they drive up the driveway, since they did grant us, I guess, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but approval of the existing condition, which is a little bit narrower than what they typically allow for this property. So part of that is to remove as much of the parking in the drive court as possible. And let's see. And as you can see on the second floor, we have the bedroom on this side. And so having that garage below allows us to have some windows and light coming in on this side, whereas otherwise this area of the building would be buried into the hillside. And then just the elevations of the building showing that two-car or the two-story structure. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you, Ms. Hughes. I'm going to open it up to public comment. If there's anyone in the audience or attending via Zoom who wishes to speak on this item. I don't see anyone in the audience.
At
Ms.
this
Sue, do we
time-
have anyone who wishes to speak via Zoom?
At this time, I do not see any raised hands for a comment on
Okay.
this item.
I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. Also, just acknowledge that I did not receive any written correspondence for this particular item. I went to the neighborhood. I'm familiar. I understand kind of the context of this lot and the flag lot. And for the most part, it's a straightforward project. I think because of the conditions of the lot and the parcel and being a flag lot, that the SFDB was correct, and it's rather an invisible project to the majority of your neighbors in the neighborhood, and not too much of an issue. I don't have too many questions. I actually really appreciate your walking me through kind of the rationale. In some ways, this seems like a personal preference for the owners who wish to have additional parking, and it's very much appreciated. It's not a requirement, but it's appreciated, and certainly helps in the context of fire safety for having not necessarily parking in the driveway, and even considering that street parking would not be an appropriate condition, or who would really want to do that necessarily, to walk down the lot in order to get to their residence. So I really don't have any immediate questions. Again, I wholeheartedly agree with the Single Family Design Board's assessment of their review, and they have a different purview than I do. And I also agree with Ms. Plummer's review of this project, and can say that this floor area modification is consistent with the purposes and intent of the A1 zone. And that essentially that you have a flag lot. It's quite large. This is not visible, so it's unlike some of the other neighboring properties that are much more visible. By adding additional structures, that might start to impact the pattern of development, but I'm not concerned about that here, and can say that, again, that this particular floor area modification is necessary to secure an appropriate improvement on the lot, and that's really, again, serving this property owner's preference to add additional covered parking, and then also being able to support a more livable unit that has more natural light with the accessory dwelling unit. So I can make the findings that are listed in the staff report for the floor area modification, can also approve and say that the accessory dwelling unit is consistent with the policies of the California Coastal Act, and that the project will not have any adverse effects to the coast or coastal resources. And again, as listed in all the reasons that Ms. Plummer drafted in her staff report, and also can make the determination that the accessory dwelling unit is exempt from further environmental reviews under Section 15303, construction or new construction. Again, Ms. Plummer identified a majority of things that are listed here fully, and I agree with them wholeheartedly. So I don't have any other comments at this time, other than to say the floor area modification can be appealed within 10 calendar days. So my decision could be suspended by any member of the Planning Commission, or any member of the public could appeal during that time period. And I just wish your client well and moving forward.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one moment while I switch screens, and I'd like to invite the next planner up for 1736 La Cornea. Okay, one moment. So we have a new item, 1736 La Cornea Drive. This is a 7,325 square foot site. Ms. Gu, do you mind switching back over to my computer? A 7,325 square foot site currently developed with a single family residence with an attached 2-car garage and an as-built air conditioning unit, spa, and deck. The project consists of demolishing the existing deck and reconstructing it in the same footprint, as well as permitting the air conditioning unit and a replacement spa. A new wall surrounding the air conditioning unit is also proposed. The discretionary applications under the jurisdiction of the staff hearing officer at this hearing are an interior setback modification to allow the proposed deck to encroach into the northern interior setback, an interior setback modification to allow the proposed deck to encroach into the eastern interior setback, and an open yard modification to allow a portion of the required open yard to be located on a deck above 36 inches in height. And then lastly, just determination that the project is categorically exempt from further environmental review pursuant to CEQA Guidelines Section 15301, existing facilities. We have Ms. DeBusk here to present this project. And Ms. Gu, would you mind switching back over to the laptop? Whenever you're ready, please.
Thank you, Ms. Kokinda. I am filling in for Stephanie Swanson today, who's the planner for this project. And I won't repeat all the information that you provided and the requests being made. So at this point, I just want to show some photos to give you context of the site. Here we've got the subject parcel as viewed, an aerial view, and then the view from the street. Here's essentially the site plan showing the existing residence, and in red is the area of the deck, which requires the modifications, and some photos of that deck from various vantage points. A close-up of the requested deck, and also another aerial view. And I will use this image just to reiterate that the project is requesting 2 interior setback modifications. The required setback is shown in that, light, thin purple line. So this area of the deck encroaches into the interior setback, as does this area of the deck towards the rear. And just to note that the spa and air conditioner do meet setback requirements as well as noise requirements. For the deck, the required setback is 10 feet. And the project also requires an open yard modification because a portion of the deck exceeds the 36-inch height requirement from existing grade. So as some background for this project, the deck was called out as unpermitted and encroaching into the interior setbacks in a zoning information report that was prepared in 2010. The current property owners pursued a planner consultation in 2014 to keep the deck as is, and they were told that staff did not support the required interior setback modifications. In 2015, a revised deck plan was submitted that only required the open yard modification and 1 interior setback modification, but that project was withdrawn before the staff hearing officer meeting. So staff does remain unsupportive of the interior setback modifications that are required to keep this as-built deck configuration. The encroachments are not necessary to accommodate an appropriate improvement on the lot in staff's determination. A deck that meets the setbacks would still provide functional outdoor space for the homeowner and would still overlook the open space that the subject lot backs up to. Rear decks are fairly common in this neighborhood. You can maybe see some in these photos. However, staff did not find an example of decks that encroach into the setbacks based on review of the aerial photos. And this is a image of what the proposed new deck would look like because it is a reconstruction of what's there. Staff is supportive of the open yard modification because it's only a very small portion of the deck that doesn't meet the on-grade requirement. It's approximately 20 square feet, where the total required open yard area is 1,250 square feet. Staff does find that this project can be exempt from CEQA under categorical exemption 15301, which allows for additions to existing facilities. So that concludes my presentation, and I can answer questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeBusk. I'd like to invite the applicant to join us, and if you could please introduce yourself for the record and walk me through your project and your thinking and your rationale for these requests, please.
Hello, my name is Robert Richards, landscape architect, and this is the owner over here, Mr. Boggle. So, if I could do you mind if I kind of just run through the presentation?
Oh, absolutely. This is your time, and you take me through anything you wish.
Okay, so if you look at the, how do I zoom in here? So these are photos of the subject deck, which is going to be essentially rebuilt in its existing location. And I wanted to point out the uses at the neighboring properties, which have both developed out towards a property line with retaining walls. And in my evaluation of it, it's kind of a more intense use of the property than the way that the owner here has created their deck. And to make it clear, he didn't build the deck there. It was built when they purchased the property, so it's something that they kind of inherited with it. And in analyzing the compatibility of this with the neighborhood, I wanted to point out that there's screening between the neighbors, and sorry, I'm not doing a good job using
No,
this.
it takes everyone a while to get used to it, so there's no judgment on
There we go.
this.
Thank you. So this is an accurate view of what's happening, between these lots here. And as you can see, the neighbor here on one side has built a retaining wall all the way out to the edge of the property line, which is visible from, the client's home here. And then the other neighbor here has built retaining walls and created livable space. And I mean, it's understandable because this is a heavily constrained lot with a slope that's falling off in the backyard. And so there's examples in the neighborhood of people making use of this space. And this is the Arroyo Hondo Preserve here. So the deck doesn't really present any privacy issues to anybody in this preserve. And the screening between the properties here hasn't created any issues between the neighbors that I'm aware of. So I wanted to go through the neighborhood and kind of determine, is this something that is compatible within the neighborhood? So what I did is I drove, you can only really see this home from Miramonte Drive, at least the deck part of the home. So I went to what were kind of like key vistas. I don't know why it's doing this. So from one view within the park, this is what you see of the deck, and you can see there's there's a fence with vegetation right in front of it. You can't see any of the deck underneath it. If you took away the deck, you'd probably see about the same situation of what you would now. There'd still have to be a railing there. And then there's a roof deck on this house, which I think is just 2 homes down. And this is another view from along Miramonte Drive, where here you can see the neighbor directly adjacent there, retaining walls, which I just pointed out. And then the one on the other side, he's got a wall that goes right along the property line. And I mean, to me, this deck presents less of a visual impact than those retaining walls do. And then as you go further through the neighborhood here, here's our existing deck. Here's the retaining walls. Here's our roof deck up here. Look, I couldn't find anywhere where I thought that this deck was doing anything other than kind of fitting in with what other people are doing in this area. And then I went to zoom in on a few other homes in this area, and here you can see this guy's got a deck that's way up high. You can see the support underneath it. Here's other examples of decks, all of them facing into the preserve. These are at second level, much more visible than the proposed deck that we're trying to rebuild. Here we just have a survey. That's the proposed deck. It's gonna, right now the deck has glass railings we're proposing to put on cable rail, which I think would have less of a visual impact than the current configuration. And then this was just to explain the open yard information and some sound requirements. And then in the staff report, there was a reference to looking at aerial views of other decks in the area. And I was wondering, do we have the ability to pull up like the county GIS website? Because I can identify 2 other properties where it shows decks that are over the property line. And I just wanted to present that as part of what's.
At this time, I don't, generally, we don't introduce pulling in other websites during presentations.
Can I show it? as
Yeah,
printed?
I'm happy to look at it.
Okay.
And
Well, so, on the record here, here's 1736 Cornea, and then 1638.
You can sit in the, if you use your microphone. And I'll just ask City TV to zoom in on which one. You want to look at this one?
Yeah, so this is kind of overall context, and I got onto the county's GIS website. It's probably, might be a little tough. You can zoom in there. So you got 1736, which is the subject property, then you got 1638 and 1608. And so this is just given context that they're similar configuration, facing the Arroyo Hondo Preserve. And then if we could go to these other views, this shows, okay, in blue is the property line there. And here, you can see this portion of this deck is over the property line. So I just want to identify that within the staff report, it said that there's no other homes from the aerial that have decks in the setback, but that's clearly over the property line. And then if we could look at the next one, this is 1638 that shows a deck over the property line. So I think that there is other examples of people within this neighborhood that have steep slopes behind their homes that are trying to make use of the slope. And my client has taken on this deck as part of purchasing the property and is just trying to do the right thing and rebuild it so that it's safe and usable, and is hoping not to have to trim the deck down. So I hope that there is information here that, defends that this is compatible with the neighborhood.
Okay. Does that conclude your presentation?
Unless Mr. Boggle has anything to say.
All right. I'm going to go back over to my other mic. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Richards. And then I'm going to open up public comment for this item. So if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to speak, if you want to come up to the podium and introduce yourself, we'd also like to request that you fill out a speaker slip. You don't have to do that before you speak, but I just ask that you fill it out for Ms. Gu. So if you just introduce yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes to speak. And Ms. Gu, if you wouldn't mind when you're,
I'll do that after.
do you mind switching over screens for me, please? Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay, my name is Mike DeBruin-Cops. I live next door to Bob and Gail. We have the house with all the retaining walls that this gentleman was referring to. Those retaining walls are all, as you call, temporary retaining walls. They're not permanent, so they can be removed at any time. That's why we didn't get permits for them. I was told by my contractor that they weren't needed to have permits, so there you go. The patio was done by Santa Barbara Paver Company. Again, that didn't need permits. The contractor informed me of that. So, we built our stuff accordingly, as we saw fit. Bob and Gail's deck has kind of sticks out a bit. So we can see them, they can see us at certain times, but they're hardly ever out there, so I don't really have any objection to them building the deck exactly as it is now. If they do exceed going out further, then I do object to that, because then they will actually be like sticking out so they can basically look right in my backyard. But if the deck is going to be built just as it is now, I don't have any problems with that. And I am, we're the only neighbor that really would be affected by that. I don't see a problem with that, so build away. But I do have one request. If Bob could relocate his flagpole to the front of the yard as opposed to the back of the yard. He has a flagpole that kind of borders our property, and it does hamper our view a bit. It doesn't hamper the view, but instead of seeing just mountains, we see a flagpole, and we'd like to request to have that flagpole moved or taken down completely, so that we don't have to look at it anymore, because we don't particularly like it. As far as we'd also like to know about the timeline of how long this project's going to take, and so that we can have an idea of when the hammering and banging and all that stuff will be over with, because I know it's, with every construction project there's noise, and we're both retired, so we don't have jobs, we're home all the time, and so the less noise the better.
Right. Well, your 2 minutes is up. Is there anything else that you wish to share at this time?
No.
Okay, thank you so much for joining.
All righty.
Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak? Okay, I did not receive any written correspondence on this item. And Ms. Gu, do we have anybody wishing to speak via Zoom?
On checking on Zoom, I do not see any other raised hands for this particular item.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. Ms. Gu, would you mind going back to the plans? Mr. Richards, thank you for your explanation and kind of walking me through some of the images. I'm curious, the kind of taking each request one by one. I'm curious why, if you do need to rebuild this, why the request is to encroach into the interior setback closest to this neighbor right here, kind of what the rationale is, as opposed to just making it conforming.
So the layout of the deck is in the exact same footprint of how it currently comes to be there. So the owners are happy with the way that functions for their home, and that was how they chose to proceed with it. And there hasn't seemed to have been a problem historically, as we just identified. The neighbor doesn't have a problem. I think that one section of the deck along the property line there, I think it only encroaches by like a foot or two or something. So it's very negligible. And then the amount of encroachment towards the preserve there at its most is, I think, 5 feet, and then where it narrows down, because it's not exactly the square with the property line. I think it goes down to like 3.5 feet. So, I mean, they're happy with the deck, with the way that it's laid out now. We looked at potentially changing it, but as the neighbor identified, it seems to be working all right between the neighbors, and so they wanted kind of the path of least resistance here, which was to rebuild the deck in its existing footprint.
And will you be using the same foundation or the kind of whatever's happening underneath the deck? Will that
The
all
deck will
need
have to be
replaced?
engineered,
Yeah.
so it'll probably be similar in its construction with posts underneath it. It's a high fire area, so we don't want to start, putting any kind of dense wood, like slatting underneath it or anything like that. So it's going to have to be engineered, but we wanted to get support from the city before going through engineering.
And what about, are you proposing any additional landscaping to buffer between the two neighbors? I mean,
That, right now,
what do you
there's
think would be appropriate? Again, just to like get, if there's any, I know that there is additional, I went out on site yesterday and was able to walk around and see the context. But again, if they're just to kind of get through the last little bit of it so that there wouldn't be a looking back in any way.
There, I think I could speak for Bob that if landscaping, additional landscaping between the neighbors would help with supporting this case, I'm sure they'd be happy to do that. Right now, that seem to be pretty well screened off, where we don't have it in this proposal, but, as part of an approval, we'd be happy to add additional landscaping in there to help screen between the properties. It didn't seem like it was necessary, but we're open to recommendations.
Okay. Just a couple of thoughts. Again, the site visit is always illuminating when you see the context of what's happening. I can certainly understand why initial pre-consultations that there's not staff support, and staff will look at these types of requests very seriously because if there's a conforming option or if there's different things, that's kind of what they're going to recommend. And so I understand staff's rationale for not necessarily supporting this particular thing. I did have some different thoughts when I went out on site because with the image below is the most helpful in some ways, that you've got 3 lots all facing the preserve in the rear, and you have 3 very different contexts of how each of them have approached their backyard. The one on the right, of course, has a retaining wall on the side, but essentially has more of a flat backyard, something a little bit more traditional. This gentleman who just spoke has created these kind of tiered retaining walls, not necessarily the majority of where they might be spending their time unless gardening, but in terms of their porch. And the subject property, the site, there's no backyard without that deck. There's really the land, the slope of the lot, although it doesn't seem significant just by looking at it on paper, it's there's really no place to enjoy. So this deck is essentially operating as a backyard. I think some other things I noticed is just the different pattern of development in terms of where the primary residences are located on site. There is a little bit more buffer with the property on the left, and I'm sorry, I just don't know its number, but how it's it's a little bit closer to the street. There's the 1736 is developed a little bit further back, so there is a little bit more of a buffer with the landscaping. I can see it wasn't 100%, as you mentioned, that I could tell, if you're really trying to peer in, it would be possible. It's a little bit weird if someone were to try to do that, but I think, both have kind of the desire for privacy. I'm just going through my rationale because I want staff to understand kind of my thinking on this, and I am supportive of the open yard modification, again, just given the context that this property, this parcel, it's hard to even imagine that it's over 7,000 square feet. It seems there's really not much there beyond the back of the residence. This image is a little deceiving because the eaves are also kind of pushed, like there's more space in between than you would imagine based on the images. And so, again, my biggest question was that interior setback along the eastern edge of what is, how difficult will that be? What kind of privacy impacts will there be with that? And I appreciate that the spa is located towards the center of it. I would have more of an issue if it was closer to that eastern edge, and I don't think there will be any privacy impacts to the rear. I'm also looked at some of the other, just doing some aerial views, and kind of agree with your assessment of the other decks and other contexts. There's something, this didn't seem significantly large to me. It seemed rather contained overall. But I agree that it should not encroach any more than the existing footprint on both at the rear or on the eastern side. So I can go ahead and make the findings that I can approve the open yard modification to say that it's necessary to secure an appropriate improvement on the lot. Again, given that there's essentially no backyard to work with, and that this is really meets the purpose and intent of providing an openness on the site and opportunity for outdoor enjoyment and living. And as staff mentioned, I agree with the assessment in the staff report. With the interior setback on the rear, I am going to go a different way than staff suggested and can approve the rear setback that is closest to the Arroyo Hondo Preserve, and saying that it is a similar context to other homes in the neighborhood that have existing decks on site, and that the long-term, I don't have any privacy concerns. It's necessary to secure an appropriate improvement, that there are no privacy concerns given that there's really not going to be development in that area. And with the identification that it shall not go any further than how it's shown on the site plan, that it shall not extend any further towards that rear. And that's just because of the gentleman, the neighbor, who said, again, that could be anything further back could pose additional privacy impacts. I can also, I think because this deck has been in existence for 13 years, that's context, and that's not a justification for as-built work. And I know that this was not something you inherited when you purchased the home, but that's also something that we tend to be very serious about and not necessarily condoning as-built construction. We really want people to get their permits when needed. But I'm convinced that the situation as is not as much, particularly if it's buffered by the landscaping. And I would just ask, I'm not going to condition it, but I assume that if there are issues with landscaping, that you all as neighbors can work this out and potentially plant something additional. And as a landscape architect, I think you could propose some things. I think that would be wise. And if it's if there's anything else, or just a determination of the, they looked like healthy plants, but I think I think the existing location of the planting shall be maintained and retained. So maybe I will add a condition of the current location of that, and then you all could work it out as neighbors if there's any additional items.
Yeah,
But I
we'll
think just
coordinate with the neighbor.
identifying that on the plans and where that is, and that shall be maintained. So there is no private, or no additional privacy impact, and that hopefully gives you some peace of mind that you'll maintain your privacy on your side, as it has been. And I think that's it. I've kind of gone through it all. I appreciate you finally getting this wrapped up and, kind of moving through and getting something permitted, and hopefully you can enjoy it for years to come. So those are my decisions. Any of my decisions can be appealed within 10 calendar days, or if any member of the Planning Commission wishes to suspend my decision, they can within that same 10-day appeal period. So I wish you well, and good luck with SFDB.
Thank you. We appreciate your help.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. DeBusk, for representing staff here today. And you are on deck for the next one as well. Ms. Gu, can you switch over? Sorry. Okay, sorry. All right, and if you can switch over. Actually, I'm sorry, I lied. Forgive me. Okay. All right, thanks for everyone's patience. We have 802 East Calle Laurales. This is a, gosh, it's strange to even say this, a 1,278,480 square foot site. It's currently vacant. A main residence with attached 3-car garage was approved under PLN 2020-00247 and is currently in the building permit process under BLD 2022-03006. The current project consists of an additional residential unit, approximately 1,310 square feet in size with a detached 2-car carport. No revisions to the main house are proposed under this application, and the discretionary applications under the jurisdiction of the staff hearing officer are a performance standard permit to allow an additional residential unit and determination that the project is categorically exempt from further environmental review pursuant to CEQA Guidelines Section 15303. We have Ms. DeBusk here represent on behalf of Ms. Swanson to go through the staff report. And Ms. Gu, whenever you're ready, could you switch over to the plans?
Thank you, Ms. Kokinda. Yes, this 21 approximately acre site is zoned RS1A, and it's currently vacant with the main residence approved in 2021. The proposed second unit on the site does not qualify as an accessory dwelling unit because of its size and because it's located within the high fire hazard area. So therefore, they are proposing it as an additional residential unit, which is another opportunity within the code to have an additional unit. And it's there are certain standards that have to be met. The main one is that the existing lot is big enough that it could be subdivided into 2 lots as a way to propose a second unit. However, they're not proposing to do that. They just want to keep the lot as configured with the additional residential unit. The proposed additional residential unit, and sorry, the site is so big, so I know this is difficult to see. Let me go to this next page and we can zoom in. There we go. So the proposed additional residential unit meets all applicable standards. It is detached from the main residence. It meets setback requirements, open yard requirements, and parking requirements. In addition, the floor area ratio requirements are easily met on this very large site. The applicant had previously submitted some environmental reports in order to permit the main residence. That included a geotechnical report, botanical report, and wildlife impact assessment. So staff used those reports, and some updates were needed to them in order to address this new residence. And so that has all been reviewed. Additionally, the project was reviewed by the Single Family Design Board and did receive favorable comments on June 5th, 2023. The project is eligible to return to SFDB on consent for PDA and final approval if the residence is approved today. With the reports on file and recommended conditions of approval, including carrying forward conditions from those reports that were just mentioned. The project can be found exempt from CEQA under categorical exemption 15303, which allows for the construction of up to 3 single-family residences. So in conclusion, staff recommends approval of the project, and I can answer questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeBask. I'd like to invite the applicant to come up, and if you could please introduce yourself for the record, and then walk us through kind of your considerations for this request.
Thank you. My name is Yu Rufin. I'm with Cornell Collective. Sorry.
You can use the mouse as well. And it's also a touch screen. That's a little dicier, but
Yeah. Okay, I can do this way. Okay. So I'm going back to it. So this is the floor plan. It's very simple. It's just an accessory building. It's about 1,300 square feet. And this is just the elevation. We add a carport for 2 cars. And the material we used is to match the main house. It's just a tile roof, and this is just a plaster. But the owner want to use the material called the structural SCIP panel, structural concrete insulated panel, because the fire. So this additional unit will be used the same material, and all the window door is clad, and everything will match, and including these timbers, and that's pretty much it is. It's very simple, and you can see the site is very high above. It's hard to see it, and the site itself is vast. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.
thank you so much. I'm going to open up public comment if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this item. Ms. Gu, do we have anyone attending via Zoom who wishes to speak?
Sorry. In checking on Zoom, I do not see any raised hands for this particular item. Thank you.
Okay, I did not receive any written correspondence either, so I will close public comment. I'm curious, this was not your original plan for an additional residential unit. Did you explore an accessory dwelling unit for this site?
This is the original plan.
This was the original plan?
Because we realized there's a high fire, and the high fire is only allowed like the ADU with 800 square feet, and the property owner really like to keep this accessory building and also the square footage. That's why we changed from ADU to apply for ARU.
Okay. Well, I can confirm that I read the SFDB minutes, and I went out on site. This was probably the first time in my site visits that I had to really go on a hike to get there. It's a massive lot, and I think what's interesting is that we have regulations for accessory dwelling units. As you say, there are different things that apply for high fire that have size limitations. This particular area of the code is not used very often, so it's a very unique site just given the size, and it's there to support this type of request and for people to pursue that. I think that it's a perfectly reasonable request, and have read the staff report and understand that looking at the findings for performance standard permits and what needs to happen, that this project meets all of those findings, as Ms. Swanson has detailed in her staff report, that it, other, like all of the prep work leading up to this point has been really the majority of the work in making sure that all of the reports and the environmental review and adding conditions so that it's not, so there's nothing really, so it's kind of wrapping a bow on this. I'm curious if you had any questions about the conditions of approval that were drafted for the staff report.
I read it.
Okay.
Clear, yes.
Okay. So can just be efficient about this review and again, can make the performance standard permit findings and say that it is, the additional residential unit is allowed in the RS1A zone and it complies with all of our development standards listed in Title 30. That there aren't any, there are no anticipated adverse public health, safety, or general welfare or anything that would be materially detrimental to the surrounding properties or improvements. This did go through a very comprehensive staff review leading up to this to verify that there are no concerns with this particular residential unit that's proposed, given the 28.1 acre site. I can say that this meets the minimum lot size requirement to accommodate this request, and that I appreciate the kind of the clustering of development as Ms. Swanson also detailed in her staff report, so that it's kind of that the development is concentrated and the impacts to the site are not going to be as severe in any way. So my approval of this performance standard also comes with the conditions of approval that have been drafted in the staff report, and really just clarifying that this additional residential unit cannot be receive certificate of occupancy until the primary residence. And then of course going down the list and making sure that as part of the environmental determination for this as well, that I can say that its project qualifies for exemption under Section 15303. And again, that is included with I can make that finding given the additional conditions that are added to the project. So that is my approval. Anyone in the next 10 calendar days can submit an appeal if they so wish. And anyone in the Planning Commission could suspend my decision within that same 10-day appeal period. Again, thank you so much. I wish your clients well and moving forward and getting through SFDB. And thank you, Ms. DeBusk, for representing Ms. Swanson today.
Thank you.
And one last one. Do you need a break? I'm just going to keep going if you're good with that. Okay. And Ms. Gu, do you mind switching over? All right, so we have 1046 and 1054 Coast Village Road. This is a 56,370 square foot site. It's currently developed with a parking lot and strip mall with up to 10 tenant spaces. There are currently 8 tenant spaces due to interior alterations of combining spaces. The project consists of an outdoor dining patio with trellis for an existing restaurant, tenant space in the parking lot, and parking lot restriping and landscaping surrounding the new patio. And the discretionary applications under the jurisdiction of the staff hearing officer required for this project are a coastal development permit to allow the proposed development in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the city's coastal zone, and determination that the project is categorically exempt from further environmental review pursuant to CEQA guidelines section 15301 existing facilities. Ms. DeBusk, whenever you're ready, and Ms. Gu, if you could switch back over. Do you have the plans up? Or yeah, okay, great. Go ahead, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ms. Kokinda. As you mentioned, this is a 56,370 square foot site. It's comprised of 2 assessor parcels, and it's zone C1 SD3, which means that it is in the coastal overlay zone. The project includes a new outdoor dining patio. So on the left, we have the existing configuration, and on the right is the proposed. The new dining area is in this area of the site, adjacent to these tenant spaces. So there is a reconfiguration of the parking in order to make that work. The outdoor dining would replace 3 parking spaces that are currently in front of those tenant spaces. Originally, the project did include 3 separate dining patios, but it has been reduced in scale to only the 1 patio. The project currently has more parking than is required by ordinance. 80 spaces are required, and they have 85 spaces existing. The project would provide 82 spaces, so still 2 more than what's required by zoning ordinance. Transportation staff has reviewed the proposal and confirmed that the parking lot layout meets all parking design standards. The project will also be adding the required bicycle parking that currently does not exist on the site. They are proposing 12 bicycle parking spaces, and 11 are required by the zoning ordinance. Just as a visual, picture's worth 1,000 words, this is the project site, view from the street of that project site. The site is located near the most inland portion of the coastal zone boundary, and as you can see, it's currently developed. There are no coastal issues related to erosion, bluff stability, beach access, or visual resources. The project was reviewed by the Architectural Board of Review on May 22nd, 2023, and received favorable comments. It's a visual of the new patio. And another depiction of what that's going to look like. The project is eligible to return on consent for project design approval and final approval at ABR if the project is approved today. The project can be found exempt from CEQA under categorical exemption 15301, which allows for additions, such as this proposed patio, to existing development. In conclusion, staff recommends approval of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Busk. And I'd like to invite the applicant who, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, please, and then sharing any additional things about this request.
Hi, I'm Lauren Ballantyne, and I represent Sherry and Associates Architects. I think that Allison did a wonderful job of explaining the project. As you can tell, it's very small in scope, and it's at the back of the property and has no negative impacts on parking. The one thing I wanted to note is that there was an error, I think, in the report. There are currently 6 bicycle parking spaces that are actually adjacent to the patio, and we are proposing for an additional 6. So there will be 12, but there is currently bike parking. And I don't really have anything else to add to the presentation, but I do have some questions about the conditions, so I'm not sure if now is a good time or.
Let's wait until after public comment.
Okay.
Okay. If that concludes your presentation, do we have anyone wishing to speak on this item? I'm going to open up public comment. Ms. Gu, do we have anyone?
In checking Zoom, I do not see any raised hands for public comment on this item. Thank you.
Okay. No one in the audience, and I didn't receive any written correspondence, so I'll close public comment. Just a couple of things. I went out on site. I've read the staff report, read the ABR minutes, familiar, kind of up to date. Curious about the operation. Does this serve just the restaurant at the very end of the development, or is this meant to be shared? What kind of operationally, like how is this envisioned to be used by the property owner?
Right. So initially, the concept that had 3 patios, there were going to be a couple of shared common spaces so that people that frequent the center can grab a coffee at one place and a book at another and kind of sit and hang out, more of a communal environment. That is no longer being proposed. So this patio is going to be just for the use of the lease space that's currently Sakana, but really just to appeal to the restaurant and bring more people into that space.
Got it. was just parking an issue with that, the potential to lose additional parking, the modification and the kind of changes to the plans?
As
or-
far as the scaling down the scope, parking was a big issue. The fees associated with the coastal development permit was also a big issue. It would have required a lot more site grading and cost of construction. So I think all three of those things in conjunction, which is a shame because I think the larger proposal would have brought a lot of life to this shopping center and could have been, a big benefit to that community. So for the time being, this is kind of the approach that the clients chose to go with.
Well, thank you for sharing. That's interesting information. Yeah, I think, looking at this project, it's not the first trellis that I've seen recently along Coast Village Road. There have been other requests and kind of considerations that have required coastal development permits and even some additional approvals. I do think that overall it's a really nice project. I think it's a benefit. Everybody wants to sit outside. There are a lot of uses along this to kind of activate that. And so it's nice to be able to extend that, and not do it in a way that doesn't require too much, additional change to the site, causing too much headache. And I can say, and also just appreciation of adding more bicycle parking to, as you mentioned, just for the record, that there is existing bicycle parking on site, but to add that is quite a benefit to people who go here. I'll just go ahead and say that I can make the findings for the coastal development permit, and then maybe we can talk about the questions you had about the conditions of approval. So let me make my findings first, and then we'll talk about that. But overall, that this project is consistent with the policies of the California Coastal Act and the protection of the ESHA and archaeological resources. It's very comparable to other development patterns in this area, and I appreciate that the ABR found that it was consistent with all design guidelines and that it meets all development standards. And then I can also say that it's consistent with all of our local coastal plan policies in terms of parking, SWIMP, and visual resources. And I concur with staff's assessment in the staff report for the findings. And now I'd like to hear your questions about the conditions of approval. We can discuss that before
I think-
finalizing.
Yeah, my main question was in terms of the trash enclosure that was brought up. There's an existing trash enclosure on site, and maybe we can scroll to the site plan. This was permitted fairly recently. I'm not sure I have the exact year on hand. If we go, we can see that it's actually existing, and I'm not sure why the graphic doesn't show the dumpsters on the existing site plan because we're not proposing any changes there. But it was built and permitted, and I might actually have it noted. No, I guess we don't. And so we're making no changes, but there's a condition referring to fire sprinklers if it's within 5 feet of either a parcel line or the building structure, which it is, and there's not really a good place for it on site unless we completely rebuild and would have to remove additional parking spaces to accommodate a trash enclosure of that size. So I think I was just, curious if that condition was implying that we needed to install fire sprinklers for the existing trash enclosure.
Mr. Besk, would you be able to respond to that?
Thank you. I don't know for sure. I know that condition that was added is a standard condition. But I believe that this project was also reviewed by Environmental Services going through in order to deem it complete. And so if they didn't have any specific comments in those letters back to you, then I believe that this is just a standard condition, and especially if it's already been permitted. It still does need to go through the building plan check process, and so whatever building code requirements there are would apply. And so if it has prior permits, then that may come into play in terms of what's acceptable under building code.
Okay.
So for conditions of approval, is it reasonable would you suggest striking this and then just let the building permit process apply? And that should either, you'll get your answer at that stage, and that way it won't be something beyond what would be environmental services would require.
Exactly, I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, so my approval of the coastal development permit applies, and adding all of the conditions with exception to condition C1 under the trash enclosure provision. So we will strike that from the conditions of approval, again, with the intention that the applicant will be submitting to the building permit, and that environmental services will review and identify if any additional needs are required for the site. And were there any other questions about the conditions of approval? Okay, and then the rest of the conditions of approval stand, and my approval is appealable within 10 calendar days, and any member of the public can appeal within that time period, or any member of the Planning Commission could suspend my decision as well. But I wish your client well in moving forward and getting back to ABR, and looking forward to dining there eventually.
All right, great, thank you.
Okay, so I think that is the last item. That concludes the staff hearing officer meeting for July 26th. We are adjourned. Thank you.